Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, and very good morning. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the IAIS special lecture, and thank you for joining us today for this lecture on the role of Muslim intellectuals amidst current global challenges. We are honored to have with us Professor Dr. Ebrahim Moosa, a distinguished guest, a distinguished scholar known for his profound insights into Islamic thought and contemporary issues, who will guide us through his profound insights into Islamic thought and contemporary issues, and engaging discourse, offering invaluable perspectives on the responsibilities, opportunities, and potential pathways for Muslim intellectuals in the face of complex challenges shaping our world today. But before we begin, I would like to first invite our IAIS Deputy CEO, Dr. Ahmad Badri Abdullah, to deliver his welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, Datuk-Datuk, I'm here representing IAIS Malaysia's management to express our deep honor and gratitude to welcome our esteemed guest, Prof. Ebrahim Moosa, a prominent Muslim academic scholar from the state. I think this is the third time we host prominent figures from the state. Firstly is Dr. Yaakob Mirza, and secondly, Dr. Mais K. Davis, and today is Prof. Ebrahim Moosa. Thank you very much for allocating your time to visit IAIS Malaysia and to share your valuable insight and wisdom in this momentous occasion. I think Prof. Ebrahim Moosa is in fact listed among the 500 most influential Muslim figure for 2024. And I'm personally benefited immensely from his scholarly work. I remember more than 10 years ago, he produced an article on the topic of applied Islamic ethics. I think I benefited a lot from that article, and his review on Niazi translation of Al-Muwafaqat. I also benefited a lot from his review on that particular work. And then the topic of Prof. Moosa's talk today is very important and significant in the light of the current development in the Muslim Ummah and the world right now. The West Asia, due to the crisis in Gaza now, is in the brink of regional war, as some observers may argue, if not the Third World War. And the world is also on the brink of global climate crisis that is leading towards a global economic crisis. So people in the military and the corporate management term it as the VUCA realities. And some also argue that this is the post-normal times. And we hope Prof. Moosa may shed some light on what are the role of the Muslim scholars, academic, public intellectuals, roles that they could function in assisting the public in making sense of our current times. So anyway, IAIS Malaysia is a think tank whose function is to assist the government to cater to Muslim global affairs and international relations, particularly relating to Muslim countries. And thank you again, Prof. Moosa, for gracing our event today, and all our esteemed guests and participants today for being together with us in this auspicious event. Let's together embark on this enlightening journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmad Badri. Before I pass the floor to Professor Ebrahim Moosa, please allow me to briefly introduce his background. Professor Ebrahim Moosa is the Mirza Family Professor of Islamic Thought and Muslim Societies at the University of Notre Dame, USA, where he also co-directs the Contending Modernities Program, which is a global research and education initiative examining the interaction among Catholic, Muslim, and other religious and secular forces in the world. He also has a joint appointment in the Department of History, the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, and the Liu Institute for Asia and Asian Studies in the Kyo School of Global Affairs. Professor Moosa has a distinguished academic career that spans several continents and disciplines. He completed his theological training in India, graduating with specialization in the traditional Islamic sciences from Darul Uloom Nadwatul Ulama in Lucknow. He earned his master's and PhD degrees from the University of Cape Town, South Africa, where he taught until the late 90s. Previously, he was a visiting professor of Islamic Studies at Stanford University and professor of Religion and Islamic Studies at Duke University. He has been consistently named, as just mentioned before, as one of the top 500 influential Muslims in the world in the last 8 years. Professor Moosa is the author of several books and articles on various aspects of Islamic thought, ethics, law, history, and modernity. His book, Ghazali and the Poetics of Imagination, won the American Academy of Religion's Best First Book in the History of Religion Award in 2006. His latest book, What is a Madrasa?, is an introduction to madrasas in India and Pakistan, which contributes a South Asian perspective to the rich scholarship on Islamic education. He has also edited and written the introduction to Fazlur Rahman's Revival and Reform in Islam, among other publications. And also, if I may add, Professor Moosa is no stranger to Malaysia. He has visited Malaysia several times for academic and public engagements. He has given lectures and seminars at various institutions such as ISTAC, IIUM, IKIM, and the University of Malaya. And he has also participated in many dialogues and conferences with many Malaysian leaders, scholars, and intellectuals on topics such as Islamic law, ethics, education, and reform. So please join me in welcoming Professor Ebrahim Moosa to the podium. I'm sorry, just the floor is yours. Just here, sorry.
Recording in progress.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa mawala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon. And thank you very much for this warm introduction, Mr. Wan Naeem Wan Mansoor, for welcoming me to the International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies. And thank you for that, your kind speech, Dr. Ahmed Badri Abdullah. You might have benefited from my review of Niazi's book, but I was also very critical of his translation. So thank you for reminding me. So it's obviously great to be at the International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, as Mr. Wan Mansoor pointed out, that I've been not to this institution, but the sponsor of this institution was Prime Minister Badawi, and he very kindly invited me and others at a particular time when he was Prime Minister to think about the questions of Islam Hadari and the questions of progressive Islam and those kinds of issues. And I'm glad that you have this wonderful facility and this opportunity to develop Islamic thought, advance Islamic studies in this institution. Today, I want to really engage more with your questions, and I hope you're going to have many questions rather than me speaking at length, but I'm going to make a few points. I think the question of the current global challenges, and especially current, is what's going on in Gaza and other places in the West Bank, is where many people around the world's attention is focused. The humanitarian crisis and those big issues that are out there. But I think the key things that I want to draw attention to is the role of Muslim intellectuals in the 20th and 21st century. These are the issues that I think, Gaza is a symptom of Muslim powerlessness in an intractable issue of the question of Palestinian statehood. And obviously, I don't have to tell you that in the last since 1999, when the Palestinian Authority made peace and recognized Israel, there has been no recognition, or there's been no talk about Palestinian statehood. There's been attempts to push through, different kinds of solutions without proper consultation. And all the spokespersons of the Palestinians have been saying that the offers on the table have been unviable offers, not viable offers. And so, these Israel and some of his Western supporters say that the Palestinians walked away from opportunities, but that's not entirely true. We are also faced with a major propaganda and war, that facts are being misrepresented, data is misrepresented, and so on. So I think one must be attentive to that. But what I want to say, I really am not the expert on the Palestinian issue, but I know this is the first and foremost things on people's minds. My focus of attention is on Islamic thought. And I think that it's become a bit of a kind of a joke that Muslims are always in crisis. In the Arabic language, the word for crisis is azma. And so now there's even a kind of a discipline called asmatology, that every time they're looking for crisisology, what's a crisis? What's a crisis? And of course, there's a larger backdrop to this crisis: colonization, Muslims' loss of power, the collapse of empires, new knowledge traditions that have come onto Muslim lands, modern knowledge, the modernity and its apparatuses, and the lag in Islamic thought in dealing with these challenges, the complete neglect of the traditions of the ulama that everybody thinks are authentic, but they have not been properly developed. Those are the big issues that Muslim societies face. That's where my attention, focuses. And I think there's a combination of issues in Muslim countries, that the modern leadership, those who handle the modern nation state, the people that are doing the work in the bureaucracies of the modern nation state in the Arab world, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa, are dealing with intractable problems, high levels of corruption, lack of political freedoms in different parts of the world, that citizens are not being treated well, civil wars, entire countries being demolished by civil wars. I'm thinking about Yemen. I'm thinking about Syria, and before that, you had imperial conquest of Afghanistan and Iraq that created massive, fractures in Muslim societies, radicalization of Muslim youth, and the kinds of blowback that created for Muslim societies globally. So it's not entirely, it's a global situation. It's a worldwide situation. These are the global powers that have also been doing certain things, and also the weakness of Muslim societies. I mean, if you think about it, just on the surface, 1.2 or 1.5 billion Muslims around the world, and pushed around by 16 million people of a Jewish background, and the state of Israel, fully backed by the United States and by Europe, right? That's the equation that you are facing. That's the power. And the question is, how can Muslim societies maximize their power? The maximization of Muslim power doesn't happen by magic. You can buy all the military hardware from Russia, China, or the United States, as many Muslim countries are spending billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars in buying military equipment. But that doesn't buy you power. What buys you power is what you produce. How many patents do you have of intellectual property? How are you treating your citizenry? What is the growth and development of your citizens? What kind of intellectual knowledge institutions that you have that are world-class, that compete with the best? That gives you power. Many countries buy these expensive military equipment and their own citizens cannot even fly those MiGs and F-16s. They have to hire Pakistani pilots, or they have to hire pilots from Malaysia and Indonesia to fly these. What it does tell you is that there are people capable of flying M16s in the Muslim world. There is talent, but the talent is in the poorer countries. The wealthier countries doesn't have that kind of talent, even though some of them are striving to gain and build talent. So power is not in terms of your military muscle. That's one index of power. But what gives you power is a certain amount of your moral strength and your strength that makes you indispensable. How do you become indispensable? That should be the key word. How do you become indispensable to the global economy? How do you become indispensable to developments globally? That your word around the table and your moral authority is something that everyone wants to hear. That doesn't help. It doesn't begin, or it doesn't make any difference whether you start your speech with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim or not. That's not going to count. That might indicate your piety and that how you're related to God. But what needs to come out of your mouth and what needs to come out of your research institutions are ideas. And if you do not have the ideas, you go back in the line. You're right at the back of the line. So sometimes we as Muslims, we mistake our identity politics and the way in which we curate and we keep our identity, that gives you moral and ethic and knowledge power. That doesn't give you knowledge power. What gives you knowledge power is what kind of intellectual risks are you prepared to take? How deep are you prepared to engage in self-critique? How free is your society? Because an unfree society cannot produce things. Yes, you can manufacture a lot of clothes because you got manpower. You got human power. You have machinery, you can do that. You can manufacture things cheaply. Are you on the cusp of the next level of creativity? That creativity impulse begins in preschool. That begins at early learning capacities that you instill in people, in young people, to ask questions, to be inquisitive. That begins between ages 2 and 6. That's a very, very important place. That creativity then, and how good is the schooling system afterwards? That will give you an edge. Not how many, if you're going to memorize chapters of the Quran, beautiful. It's going to give you piety. It's going to give you an added layer of understanding. But are you reading the Quran with eyes that can see? Or are you just reading is the Quran giving you basira? قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني. This is the path. What the Quran is saying, this is the path. This is the moral path. This is the moral path. I call unto God to this moral path with insight. So even in your exploration of morality, you need to have insight. It cannot be a static thing. Morality is about the question of the good, but the form of the good changes in every time and place. You must have good, but the form and the nature of the good changes in an information culture, is different from that of the industrial culture, is different from that from agricultural culture. These are changes that take place in human society. So the idea of the good is what Islam says: you must strive for the good, but you must have insight, basira. And basira is not something that you pray for, but basira is something that you cultivate. You cultivate that with education, with critical questions, with understanding, by reading widely, by not creating certain kinds of epistemological apartheid that we'll come to. So the first thing is developing creativity, capacity is not rocket science. It's simple. You need to apply yourself to it. It's an application. It requires a culture of openness and inquisitiveness that can also be acquired. It's not rocket science. I mean, just think about, not very far from you here, is a country called China. And 100 years ago was at the bottom pile of the nations. Within 30 to 50 years, China has become a global power, challenging all the major powers in the world. 500 million people out of poverty. That's extraordinary. That's extraordinary. It is something that every person in Malaysia and Southeast Asia should be studying carefully. What is this miracle? How does this happen? Because if it can happen across the road, across the China Sea, it can happen here. You could be the next China. But it requires a certain, and this, again, this is not rocket science. This is something that can be acquired. So the first thing is about the question of creativity and insight. What kind of steps must be taken? You see, you can have, I've been to IKIM, I've been to ISTAC, I've been to IAIS. You have great facilities. But the question is, how do you value your intellectual output? The valuation of the intellectual output is something that every Muslim organization, from government to civil society to communities, must invest in, to always strive for the best, to always strive to go further. Second thing is, in order to do creativity, you must cultivate diversity of thought. If you're not going to have diversity of thought, in other words, when you have a meeting, you want people to have 5 different opinions around the table. You must actually make that possible. I want to have that one person who's going to think out of the box, and that other person and you must have a deep conversation with diversity. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Everybody's just going to pull in the same direction. So in fact, one must structure the conversation of everything based on diversity. All the different players must be there. No one should be discriminated against for having a different opinion, but rather difference of opinion should be welcomed. And if it's not welcomed, then there's a problem. Why did the Prophet say, "Ikhtilafu ummati rahmah"? That differences of opinion is a blessing. Precisely because we think differently, we have different capacities and different strategies. So diversity of thought. Thirdly, is that all knowledge is the inheritance of Muslims. All knowledge. And since the colonial period, because modernity and modern knowledge came on the backs of colonialism, Muslims are still struggling, having a hang-up and having a kind of a mental block and psychological hang-ups about knowledge from the West. Even those who are excellent in the sciences, in engineering, in technology, in the hard sciences, or in the social sciences, are still inhibited psychologically by what they are doing because of the provenance of these disciplines from where they come. Their provenance, their origins are from the West. And when it comes to the religious sciences, there's been a consistent propaganda in this country and other country that continuously tells people that modernity is a bad thing. And modernity is a danger and so on. Modernity is like every thought process. It's going to challenge you. You think Muslims did not find challenges, that the faith tradition that was based in 7th century Arabia that had a leadership of the Prophet of 22 years and a caliphate of about 35 years. And that tradition, which has about 50 years of knowledge in the Arabian Peninsula, moves into Syria. And the Umayyads cultivate that knowledge tradition. And they say from day one, all the expansion we do, we're going to spend millions of our wealth in translating from the knowledge of societies around us. The first question they had was not, oh my God, is this knowledge dangerous? These are knowledge from the Greeks. These are polytheists. Is this not going to corrupt us? No, they could see an idea and they said, we need this idea. They translated en masse into Arabic. The Arabic language flourished. Culture flourished. Ideas flourished. The Umayyads, in a span of 85 years, was the biggest and largest empire in its time. 85 years. Can be done. The one thing people who left the Arabian Peninsula they had a drive, they were world makers, and they were open to creativity. They did not say, oh my gosh, this is going to corrupt our things that I learned from our Prophet. That was not the first question. That was not the first question they had in mind. They said, what works? How can it work? What is good? What is the good? That was their question. With us, the first question is this acceptable? Does it pass the Islamization of knowledge test? Does it pass the integration test? Does it pass this test? Right? Unfortunately, and I love IIIT. I love all the people in IIIT, but I'm a friendly critic. I'm a friendly critic, and you need friendly critics. Okay, so integration of knowledge is a new step in a new direction, but I still see that there is a kind of a gate check. A gate check. How does this knowledge qualify to get? Knowledge is knowledge. One of the things I've learned, I was a big fan of Islamization of knowledge. I confess. I read everything of Farooqi. Okay? I read everything. And he was a great inspiration for me. Okay? And I read Fazlur Rahman, I read a number of thinkers and so on. But what I'm saying here is that knowledge does not have a religion. Al-ilmu la deena lahu. Knowledge doesn't have a religion. Knowledge is knowledge. And hence, we need to become creative. We need to be bold. We need to take risks. And in our faith tradition, taking risks and exploring knowledge with good intention, with good bona fides. And the Prophet said in the hadith, Man ijtahada fa asaba falahu ajran wa in akhta falahu ajrun wahid. That whoever undertakes creative knowledge, ijtihad, it gets 2 rewards. If you get it wrong, you get 1 reward. So long as your intention is clear, you are fully equipped to undertake those tasks to produce new knowledge. It's a win-win situation. So I don't think we need to be afraid. But the greater catastrophe, if Malaysia, Indonesia, parts of the Arab Muslim world, Africa and other parts have made great strides in different fields of science and so on, the catastrophe that we are facing is the catastrophe of religious thought. Everywhere religious thought, and the people who are giving fatwas, the people who are the imams who drive opinion, and Muslims very much want moral teachings, very much want theological teaching, very much want that. We have underfunded, under-resourced, undernourished those sectors. So when you find a crazy fatwa authorizing suicide bombings, authorizing different kinds of things, you want to get shocked. And you said, oh, extremism. Well, you haven't invested in the people that are going to be the makers of morality and ideas and guidance. You have not invested sufficiently. The madrasas all over the world are underfunded. Communities support them. In places like here, you might get government grants, I don't know. But the majority of the people who are handling religion on the ground in different parts of Malaysia or Indonesia are not graduates of ISTAC. They're not even graduates of International Islamic University. They study in the local pesantren or in traditional schools. Then they learn some things, and then they go to Egypt or they go to Saudi Arabia, and they come back with really crazy ideas, and then it takes them 20 years to unlearn those ideas. And in between that 20 years, a lot of damage was done to communities. That's a story. That's a story over and over. And I know that because I'm part of that community. I know exactly what goes on. So we are not investing seriously there should be in places like this institute, maybe you do it, or IKIM or ISTAC, there should be a weekly workshops for your learned ulama from all over this country. This place must be overflowing with people from that kind of background. And some of the great, maybe you do it already, maybe you do it once or twice a year. I'm saying you must do it 20 times a year. So I'm just encouraging you. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just encouraging you to do things that ought to be done, and you might be doing it. But we need to equip them with the best exposure and learning, and fund them and give them grants, and allow them to make mistakes, allow them to learn. Do not curate the learning as if they are infantile and children. They are very smart. In my Madrasa Discourses program I've been doing for the last 5 years, with a generous grant from the John Templeton Foundation, we've trained young ulama graduating from India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. I'm doing it from several thousand miles away, online education. Then 2 times a year, we meet in person, teaching them scientific literacy and connecting that scientific literacy to Islamic theology and other disciplines. It's a small pilot project that I'm undertaking. But this must be done at a higher scale. This must be done repeatedly according to your own needs and models at scale. Therefore, if each of these wonderful institutions that you have around here in KL can do 20 such seminars, teaching people, getting the best expertise to expose to them, I can tell you that what we've seen in South Asia, these young ulama want to learn, they're creative, and they begin to fly. Because they have the languages, they can read the classical tradition, and they deepen their knowledge. So one of the biggest deficits that is happening, that Muslims have a lot of books in different languages. The madrasas and pesantran are doing their work, but there's no depth, the lack of depth. People can't tell you, how did Ghazali arrive at that opinion? So in other words, we are not accessing the apparatus of the early Muslim thinkers. The apparatus is not accessed. So knowledge is very thin, but it's also very loud. Very loud and very thin. So what we need to do is to learn how the people in the past created depth. And the other thing is, when you study tradition, you must have a critical tradition. Everything in the past is not usable in the present. The reason you study the past is to show how creative and innovative your ancestors were. With that, you get the psychological courage to do creativity now. But your answers, your questions are different, your answers are going to be different. So this segregation in the ulum ad-din between secular knowledge and the religious knowledge, the social sciences and the humanities, that segregation, in my view, is harmful. If I could make it more dramatic, I would say it is sinful. But I can't punish anybody and claim it is sin. But I think I'm speaking metaphorically and figuratively. Sociology of law, anthropology, social psychology, these disciplines must be part of the toolkit of religious scholars from already 100 years ago. But if not, you haven't started then, you have to start it now. And this knowledge apartheid, this bifurcation that we are doing and worrying that if I'm going to read Hegel or Kant or Nietzsche, I'm going to go astray. That is Surprising. I don't know why we are afraid of questions. Ghazali, in his book called Mizanul Amal, starts off with a question to say, his question is, people tell him that you are combining in this book or in your work the knowledge of the Sufis. That's one stream. The second stream is you're combining the knowledge of the theologians that you like, that is the Asharites, and you also take knowledge from other theologians and other scholars, like the philosophy you've taken. So isn't the idea of a knowledge tradition what we call a discursive tradition? A discursive tradition means arguments about knowledge. And isn't the thing about the knowledge tradition that you must only follow one? And Ghazali says, no, a knowledge tradition can mean many things, and it can be multidisciplinary and multidimensional. And as he concludes that book, he says, he quotes Mutanabbi, خذ ما تراه ودع شيئا سمعت به في طلعة الشمس ما يغنيك عن زحل. That take what you see and leave off those things that you had heard. Ghazali quotes Mutanabbi. Mutanabbi is quite brave and in your face. Mutanabbi is a very bold poet. That his name is also Mutanabbi. He's acting like a false prophet. He's a false prophet. He says, I can say stuff. He's not heretical. He just pushes the envelope. Mutanabbi is a great philosopher in my view. He understands the human soul. And so Ghazali quotes him, says, leave off things, take what you see, what is empirically, the evidence in front of you, and leave off those things that you have heard about. Because when the sun, in the olden days, at night people used to follow Saturn to give them direction. But when the sun rises, Saturn is no use to you. When the sun rises, what use is Saturn to thee? What Ghazali is basically saying, using Mutanabbi, is that we need to be empirical, look at the realities in front of us, and not always stop the reality in front of us by saying, we heard this and we heard that. In other words, don't let tradition block you from the reality in front of you. Tradition is important, absolutely. But tradition has a vote. Tradition doesn't have a veto. Tradition has a vote in the conversation. Tradition doesn't have a veto. What has a veto is history. History has a veto. History will tell you these things are no longer viable. And you have to struggle to abandon certain things and take on things. So what am I talking about? I'm not talking about the ibadat. The ibadat stays on their place. But in the muamalat, things are changing in a whole variety of ways that I'm sure many of you have heard already, much more profound lectures of people trying to tell you about maqasidul falasif, maqasidul sharia, and a whole range of other things. We're not going to repeat that here. But what I'm trying to say is that we need to end especially in the religious thought, this bifurcation, this segregation of knowledge between knowledge developed in Islamic societies and knowledge developed from outside. That is a catastrophe. And therefore, our religious thought is not developing and not growing and not becoming creative. And we're not doing problem solving, but rather we are making more problems, creating more problems. Again, Mutanabbi says, وَلَمْ أَرَى فِي عُيُوبِ النَّاسِ شَيْئًا كَنَقْصِ الْقَادِرِينَ عَلَى التَّمَامِ. This is the task that they started. So Mutanabbi says, I have not seen amongst the weaknesses or the errors of people anything like the fact that the incapacity of capable people to finish a task. The incapacity of capable people to complete a task. It means it is a message for me that a lot of the assignments that I have incomplete, the books that I still need to write, I need to get it done. But it also applies to each one of us who got outstanding long list of incomplete tasks to complete it. But it also applies to societies who have started on a path and you need to finish the job, to give the baton to the next generation. Because when you are not finishing the job, what happens? Every next generation starts all over from day one again. So for instance, let's just take this debate about ijtihad in Muslim society. Can Muslims do ijtihad? Okay. So if you go to ulama, they would say ijtihad is a fiqh term and it's only applied to fiqh, and no one is as qualified as Shafi or as Abu Hanifa today to do fiqh, to do ijtihad at fiqh. Okay. Every fatwa, giving a fatwa is a form of ijtihad. Every mufti is doing some kind of ijtihad. But the ijtihad does not succeed because the only thing the mufti is taking is what other muftis have said before and trying to find some answer or some indication and develop it. So therefore, I'm tired of these ijtihad debates because it is completely misunderstood. I said earlier, it's like putting some stones in a Coke can and just making a lot of noise, ijtihad. But you're really not. Because what? Ijtihad means that you're going to bring in new knowledge into the conversation. And that's the number one thing, that we are not interested in new knowledge. We're not interested in expanding our understanding of the world and human society and so on. So how can you do ijtihad when you're closing off? The only thing you want to do is what I call the yellow pages. You want to use the old books from the age, a book that is 500 years old. You think that book is going to give you the answer for ijtihad. The author of that book will be really embarrassed, because he would say, or she would say, that I wrote the solution for my time. I didn't write the solution for your time. But that is the crisis. So this is the biggest crisis we are facing. And I'm afraid all the major Muslim organizations have neglected religious thought tremendously. Tremendously. Everywhere from Egypt to Saudi Arabia to Syria, Sudan, different parts of the world. Huge neglect on the part of the state and on the part of the community. But when the rubber hits the road and there's trouble, then everybody wants to point fingers, but there's no investment. The investment must be there in both resources and other things. And the last thing I'm going to say is that when we do questions of training the ulama and upgrading the skill set of the ulama, any knowledge project, even the things that IAIS is doing and other institutions are doing here, it must be related to the real life issues of Muslim societies. If it's not related to the real life issues of Muslim societies, it's going to be deeply problem. Yes, you do need time in the library to ask the question, to spend and do the research, and you need to do that. But that research, some of that research is theoretical. Some of that research is theoretical and might not have immediate application to on-the-ground realities. But in some ways, you need to find a way that some people are going to do the theoretical work, other people are going to do the work that is related to lived communities. In other words, we need to become organic intellectuals. There is no time to wait anymore. As Gramsci said, organic intellectuals are intellectuals who got their feet on the ground. Their feet on the ground, understanding the challenges and realities in their societies. To address that, and there would be several layers of questions that have to be researched, answers have to be found. And I didn't say answer, I said answers. There'll be multiple answers to that question. And then we can decide which ones are the best ones that work. So I think the crisis of the role of Muslim intellectuals, I'm saying that the Muslim intelligentsia on the religious side is the weakest part of the link in Muslim societies, the weakest, and it's on life support. It's on life support and requires urgent attention. This is the thing I'm saying everywhere, and I'm seeing the problems everywhere. So I'm just not talking because, I come from that kind of background and I'm trying to, talk up the ulama, but I'm seeing the struggles that they're having, the lack of skills, the lack of abilities, the lack of resources. And those resources must be made available, and we need to have a revolution in Islamic thinking. How? By first deepening understanding of the tradition. We need to deepen multiple layers of the tradition. Because otherwise, for the last 100 years, we're having Islamic revivalist groups that have been trying to tell us Islam on a very superficial narrative. Very superficial narrative. Just read the Quran and follow the Hadith. No, you need to know what the deep background of how that meaning is made in the Quran. That's where you need scholarship. And the absence of that scholarship has resulted in trauma in Muslim societies. A guy who studied engineering, who studies a couple of books of Ibn Taymiyyah, wants to write a fatwa about how the Muslim world must confront the global powers of the day. I'm talking about Osama bin Laden. He doesn't understand the tradition. He knows some Arabic. He read 2-3 books, and he writes an angry fatwa. And millions sympathize with him, and thousands perish with him. This is not, but he can fill the gap because the better are unavailable. The people who are capable, people who have the background, people who have the capacity to develop profound thought, better solutions, they are not empowered. So this pseudo engineer is going to take over. And so they have done around many parts of the world. And the ulama are powerless because they can't play that game. Because the folks who are doing this kind of simplistic talk, they have the bullhorn. First of all, educated Muslims find that, educated Muslims, I mean Muslims who are educated in sciences and social science and so on, bankers, your lawyers, your engineers, they find the simple narrative of Islam very, very, very acceptable. Oh my God, they get it in 2 minutes. Because they are lazy, they don't want to think. So someone else must think for them. So lazy thought is part of our thing. And we don't want to make an effort to understand complex ideas. Islam is about complexity. And unless we're not going to get back that complexity, the Prophet ﷺ said the hadith, I'm going to close with this, الناس معادن الناس معادن خياركم في الجاهلية خياركم في الإسلام إذا فقهوا أو إذا فقهوا. That human beings are like quarries or mines where precious metals are there. Human beings are like quarries or mines. The best of you in Jahiliyyah will become the best of you in Islam. Can you imagine that? The best of you in Jahiliyyah are the best. So the Prophet basically says, they were good people. They have people of good character, even though they were polytheists. They were not monotheists. But that good quality will transfer into Islam. Character is not religion specific. Character is character. Intelligence is intelligence. Going back to my earlier conversation that I said, don't create segregation in knowledge that if a Russian or a European or a Frenchman or Chinese person develop knowledge that you should not access that knowledge. That's not the case. It should be the case. The Prophet says, but he says, the best of you in Jahiliyyah is the best of you in Islam if you have moral discernment, either if you have understanding. The word fiqh and is not only rules and regulation. Fiqh is deep understanding, complex understanding, moral discernment. To be able to discern. Fiqh is a philosophical tradition. That's what Al-Bihari, who writes Musallam al-Thubut, says, that al-fiqhu hikmatun far'iyyatun shar'iyyah. That fiqh is philosophy of a subsidiary kind of the revelation. So fiqh is the philosophical. The earliest and the best of Muslim scholars tells you learn philosophy, learn how to think, different ways of thinking. That's the key issues. And so the prophetic hadith that I cited for you does the same thing, saying we need to be a thinking people. لِأُولِي الْأَبْصَارِ لِأُولِي النُّهَى أُولِي الْأُقُولِ. The people of understanding. And so, I'm passionate about these things because, these are the crises in Muslim societies. And without passion, I can't do anything. So I'm afraid that if my passion has offended you,
We have now reached the interactive session. I'm sure many of us would have loved to hear more from our eminent professor here. But true to his words, to encourage more openness and creativity, the Prof has requested that we make more time for the Q&A. So I think we'll add 15 more minutes to the schedule. And also because we started a bit late. And so please raise your hand if you have a question, and also kindly state your name and affiliations, if any. And if we can take the first 3 questions, one for Mr. Arif, Mr. Said, and maybe one more for the first round. Mr. Asil. All right. So the first one.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bismillahilladzi la yadurru ma ismihi syai'un fil ardi wala fis sama'i wa huwa as-sami'ul alim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, Prof. Thank you for a very compelling discussion. I appreciate your passion, and alhamdulillah, I've learned a lot from your talk. Also, my name is Arif, and I was based in SOAS for a bit, and we read some of your work for our course called Modern Trends in Islam. And the lecturer was Hussam Al-Malak. I'm not sure if you've heard of Hussam Al-Malak. But I'm very interested in what you mentioned about tradition has a vote and tradition does not have a veto. It's a very interesting point to make. But you said history has a veto. So are you saying that historicism is the way to go? Because when we talk about history, obviously he or she who controls the narrative, who controls history, controls or influences the knowledge production. So, with the title, The Role of Muslim Intellectuals Amidst Current Global Challenges, we see this challenge now of history as being represented by a certain group of people, for example, and the issue of Gaza, for example. And we don't have any, to my knowledge, Muslim intellectuals who maybe signed the petition or together in condemning these atrocities, in saying that the problem is with certain lobbying groups. And we need not mention who these groups are. But, for example, the suppression of Muslim voices is a very common thing, especially for intellectuals. And you mentioned that, the weakest link are the Muslim intellectuals themselves. So how do we have the political will or the academic will to actually come together and condemn the atrocities, for example? Because again, he or she who controls the narrative controls the knowledge production and influences the knowledge production. That's all from me. Thank you very much. Jazakallah khair.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Said Akbar. Thank you, Said Akbar. Yes, Dr. Ebrahim, thank you for your speech. It is an excellent speech. I really think you should develop what you have just said. I think you should make the rest of your career. I think you should make the rest of your career on what you have said today. It's very, very, very interesting. I would like to answer a question which you suggest my thoughts. Why Muslims are afraid to discuss things, different views, and so on. But before I say that, just a point about you mentioned power, about the Jewish and the Palestine conflict. You mentioned F-16s and MiG aeroplanes and things like that. The Jewish people have obtained military power only after 1948. Before that, they were pretty much on the receiving end of things, Adolf Hitler, Holocaust, and all that. And way before that, in the early 20th centuries, there were anti-Jewish pogroms in Europe. They were put in ghettos and things like that. But in one thing that the Jews have always been powerful since the 20th century is knowledge. And from the 1920s onwards, the entire group or the genre of nuclear physics, for example, was Jewish. Oppenheimer, Teller, Einstein. So they always had knowledge. That was their power. And so it is just an application of knowledge in whichever field that is useful to them, which at this point is a military power. So it is the knowledge that gives them power. What you use it for, business, economics, science is the later, is the outcome later. But they've always loved knowledge, which we don't have in the Muslim countries. The point that you raised on why Muslims are afraid, I'd like you, I'm sure you know this. Most Muslim countries, including Malaysia, we have some form of Islamic enactment, Sharia enactment, Islamic penal enactments, which are different names, camouflage names for what you might call blasphemy laws, apostasy laws, what they do is criminalize thinking. What you've been saying this morning, criminalize thinking. If you say something different, you can be held accountable. You can be held legally accountable. You can be criminalized. You can be sent to jail. In this country, to talk about religion, you need a permit from the government. Otherwise, you cannot. And most countries have this. So the question, why can't Muslims develop thinking? Why is our thinking so cramped? My view is because of this. That's why people are afraid to talk. So in order to be able to encourage discussion and make Islamic thinking really grow, we have to remove these impediments, which not a single Muslim society is doing now in this world, not one. So as long as we have these laws which criminalize thinking, blasphemy laws and Sharia enactments, that is for how long I think we will not be able to think. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Asel. My question actually very similar to what was just mentioned. Specifically, your thoughts on the Arab Spring, which is now, I think, 12 years past, more or less dead. Seems like it was a complete failure in terms of the outcomes, if the outcomes were improved governance or democracy. At that time, I think people thought this is the first step towards creating greater openness, more freedom of thought, more freedom of expression. Now, I think people have pretty much moved on from thinking that. And that's not to say that in other odd, strange ways, you find efforts by Muslim countries which are still under authoritarian systems trying to create limited space or more expansive space for creative thinking, innovation, so long as it doesn't touch on certain issues. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, do we need to relive the painful experience of another set of failed revolutions in order to achieve some of these objectives? Or have we realized that there's a difference between types of political authority and what types of intellectual thought or free thought can take place within different types of political systems?
Okay, thank you very much for these questions. Arif, I think you might have missed you might have come late. I did talk about the Gaza thing, but your question is still relevant, is that, so you asked the question about tradition and veto and history. I think history, so, there's been a lot of stuff about historicism. Historicism is bad. No, historicism is not bad. Historicism basically means there's some extreme element of historicism that everything is determined by history. Everything is determined by history. And in some ways, things are determined by history in terms of calendrical time. But there's also another notion of time, which is experiential time. What Koselleck talks about, Reinhard Koselleck talks about the idea that, and it's a much more complex idea that, Nietzsche pointed out and Heidegger clarified it, that the search for certainty, and this way in which the world has changed in such a way that we no longer see the horizon, but everywhere we turn, we see man, we see the human being. And the human being is caught up inside himself. The obsession, I mean, the biggest question of the 20th century was the self. What is the self? How the self? And it becomes the egotistical self also. It becomes the commercialized self. But there is a problem of the self because science and the big questions in science, from evolution, the Big Bang evolution and everything else that follows, has altered our understanding of our place in the cosmos. And that is the true picture that Mutanabbi says, khud ma tarahu. You have to take what you are seeing. To hold on to a cosmology that is Aristotelian and Platonic is not smart. And to say that is the only thing that, yes, our ancestors wrote along that cosmology, that's precisely the change that must take place. Because your cell phone, from the water that you drink, everything around you operates on a different a cosmology that is empirical and works. And the core part of everything that you have here is mathematical. So anybody telling you another story of another cosmology and saying you must believe in it is telling you a lullaby story. That's a lullaby. It's beautiful, it's good historically to understand, but it doesn't. So I want you to know that, but you also know that we know and we understand, and that's how we can understand Razi or Ibn Sina or Ghazali. But that's not a story that's working in our world today. Now you can say René Guénon said that that is the destruction of science. The true science is alchemy and all this kind of stuff. You can tell me that. I said, yes, I've read René Guénon. So try and do and solve the problems of your body following René Guénon's science. When you have cancer, go to René Guénon. When you have a heart attack, go to René Guénon. I mean, telling me stories, right? So I think that's a number one. So history has changed. I mean, the world has changed. The empirical world we're living in. And things are happening because of that understanding of the world. It's not that, you know, yes, there's error too. We learn all the time. It's not perfect. Nothing is perfect. So tradition has a vote, not a veto. History has a veto because history has changed certain things. You know, we all agonize, and I get very angry on Twitter, and I'm saying all kinds of stuff and so on. And so I've signed on to several petitions. It's not the first time I've signed on petitions. Many hundreds and thousands of Muslims have signed petitions. But you know that, I mean, we have to study history critically. 3 armies invades Israel in 1948 and can do nothing, and they all go back. They do it in 67, they lose. So if you can't win a war, don't start one. I mean, we have to be honest. And then we can't say, oh, well, the global powers didn't send, Russia didn't send arms, and all kind, oh, this general did in the Egyptian army, you know, created he didn't do that. Everybody is telling stories. And Palestinians are also frustrated. I mean, they at their last. I mean, so as much as we can't fully condone what Hamas has done and started this round, but we also know it's not the beginning. They didn't start this. This has been going on for 70 years. And this morning, Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said that exactly. Guterres said that these people have been suffering under this for 70 years. And the Israeli foreign minister demanded that he must resign. So truth is being heard. But that's on the global stage for the right and now. But there's a backstory of mistakes. And the Arab country, each Arab country wants to have the Abrahamic Accords with Israel. The populations are in one place, the government's in another place. So there's a much more complex story, right? And you know, I don't have the answers to all these things. I'm only a scholar. I work in a particular area. We need to tap other kinds of brain trust, begin thinking ourselves out of how do you strategically get there. So strategic intelligence is something we lack a great deal. How do you strategically build capacity? You must have strategic intelligence. Strategic intelligence that you have to use on the ground when there's a problem. How do you solve it? The question that Zaid Akbar raised is, you know, yeah, there are limitations on laws and so on. And I think that's why you elect people to parliament. Therefore, you have a democracy. Therefore, you have to make these items of conversation in your society, and legislation can be changed. Nothing is permanent, but that requires political work. You have to mobilize. You have to talk. You have to talk to representatives. You have to convince them that some things are not good for the society. And in the meanwhile, don't expose yourself to risk, but do work in a strategic way that where the work needs to be done should be done. So it's not like waiting for those laws to change. You must start right now. If you see the crisis of the kids in Gaza, more than 2,000 or 3,000 kids, you know, the future has been killed. shouldn't we be thinking that these kids that we have in our neighborhoods, how do we educate those kids that those kids don't end up in the street and on the bottom of the pile? Shouldn't we be energizing and doing things in a creative way? Your own children and other children, less time on what's the name, playing games and stupid and idiotic games that is just making them what's the name, and how much time are they doing creative stuff? Can you intervene that you make sure that the next generation are better than you, doing greater things than you? Are you equipping them with all this kind of stuff? There are bad habits in our societies. We want to eat a lot, we want to have luxury, a lot of luxury, but not very serious. How hard do we work in the tasks that we are assigned? So what that scene, that horrific and tyrannical and tragic scene that is playing out should be a wake-up call. Because this can happen here. It can happen anywhere. You can have global powers coming around different parts of the world. So don't think it's happening in Gaza. The tragedy could be of a different order here, of a different kind. When you don't have intelligence, when you don't have resources, when you're not planning. The modern world is you have to plan. It's all about planning forward. And sometimes planning forward is an error, but you learn and you have to fix those things. So you have to, I do recommend a very complex book called Coping with Defeat by Jonathan Lawrence, looking at how Catholics and Muslims have coped with defeat. I'm reading the book now because I have to speak about that book later in November at a conference. It shows you. But this question of religion, he shows in many, many countries that every Muslim country, the state has taken control of religion. The state has taken control of religion because they see religion as a force and power that needs to be controlled. Otherwise, things are going to go out of hand. Now, even in parts of the country, in parts of the world that I know where the state is not under where religion is not under control of the state, Muslims are not doing better either. So for instance, in India, religion is not under the control of the state. There's something called Muslim family law thing, but in Pakistan, they tried to take control of the madrasas and so on, never succeeded. But there, the failures are because those institutions, the madrasas, who spark Sunni Shia violence from time to time, anti-Ahmadi, attacks and violence, and when the Prophet is insulted around the world, they paralyze the entire country, like in Pakistan, and paralyzes the economy of the country because the Prophet had been insulted in Denmark, and then the entire country is paralyzed. I mean, that's not intelligent. You can be passionate that the Prophet hire a stadium and express your disagreement, but don't paralyze the country. And don't think that Pakistan can change things on the UN and ask the world to stop insulting the Prophet. Pakistan can't do that. Pakistan is a powerless country. Powerless in the global stage. So what needs to be done is a certain level of intelligence and preserving the resources we have and maximizing the resources. Every child must be educated. No child should die because of poverty or disease. No child should be deprived of a proper education for the future. And the best children should be dedicated to thinking about philosophy and about the human sciences and about the religion. The best minds must go in there, must be invested in that, in history and historians and so on. So Asil, your question about the Arab Spring and authoritarian systems and failed thought. I need more help in thinking about these issues because on the one hand, I gave the example of China, which is an authoritarian society. And it seems that authoritarian societies, or Russia under communism was authoritarian, but Russia put up the first man in space, Sputnik, right? So I don't know exactly what the recipe is. It seems that authoritarian societies can also advance in certain areas. Now, there used to be the orthodoxy that authoritarian societies can imitate, but they can't innovate. That the R&D will always be in America because America is a free society. The R&D will only be there and not in China. Therefore, they are China, America. I don't think that is true anymore. R&D means research and development. That the research and development happen in America, the thing will be made. India was a democratic country going more towards authoritarianism right now, or Hindutva, but India has put a rocket on the dark side of the moon. Right? I mean, there's things are happening around the world. So what I'm saying is that I think that, the Arab Spring is an explosion, Gaza is an explosion. Those are symptoms of problems that have not been solved for 20, 30 years. They're going to explode again. And the only way this is going to happen, look at Ghanouchi, worked hard, tried to create a democratic society in Tunisia, and you have a democratically elected president who does a coup and becomes authoritarian. There are also forces in the Muslim world. There are forces in the Muslim world that are aiding and abetting with large amounts of money authoritarianism, because they want to retain a certain form of Islam that is conducive to monarchy and monarchical systems. So there's going to be a lot of modernization, but with a very primitive form of governance. Maybe it will work. I don't know. It could work. If authoritarianism could work, then you could have a system of the royalty, and there could be, economic and material prosperity. I don't know. But what I do know is that if those societies don't have the moral guardrails and the philosophical and spiritual guardrails, you can have problems. I'm thinking about Saudi Arabia. 40% of Saudi Arabia's economy are controlled by women. You're going to have a crisis of masculinity there very soon. A crisis of masculinity. You don't see the religious Kutawa in the streets anymore. They're not there. Where are they? What is the place of religion? Right? Look at Turkey. Turkey banned religion from the public sphere. The religious knowledge was there. But then under AK Party, it came back slowly in a different form. People need those things. So we have to think about the issues in complex ways. You can have religion, but good religion, good religious practices, good religious intelligence, and so on, and have prosperity. It's not one or the other, either or. So, your question goes beyond my pay grade, as they say. I'm not qualified to tell you more about that. I can only describe for you things the way I'm seeing. But these authoritarian systems are there, and they are getting boosts with success in other places. So you have to think through those issues, that maybe it can work. And then how do you maximize? But I think that if the question of religion that I'm passionate about, the religious and moral and cultural values, those are not addressed, it's going to, because that could be the seats of restlessness. One of the things that people keep religion in a lockbox through ministers of religion and so on and so forth, and controlling it, because they see religion as a dangerous force that can explode. And I think that you have to develop religious development in tandem with the development of the larger society, if not faster, because it can advance the society. You see, a kid must be able to feel that I want to read Einstein, and no one is going to say that, why are you reading that and why not reading the Quran? Why are you not learning Arabic? Why are you learning quantum mechanics and quantum physics? That kid must feel free to do that. But you should also have that kind of Islamic education. The kid will say, I'm really interested in the Islamic thought. It's really great. It's making me think. It's imaginative. Maybe Einstein is not so interesting. You need that kind of presentation of Islam too, that will make that student hungry for other things about its culture, its history, and so on. Must be creative. That's the best I can get right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think maybe we can accept one or two more questions, but we have to make it quick, because
I have to be quick.
Yeah.
I think we should take the latest question.
One there, and from Dato here. Okay, please.
Make it quick and I will answer it quickly.
So 3 questions within 5 minutes, if possible.
I'm normally not very honest when I say I'll answer it quickly.
Okay, yes, please. The lady at the front, Dato' Aidit, and back.
Okay, I'm Andeline. I'll make it super quick. Andeline, yes. And my question is in regards to this lack of religious literacy you speak to, the lack of intellectual and critical thought. And I want to ask, how much of that is due to the framing of our conversations that come through a patriarchal mindset, and how much of women's voices are being minimized and marginalized through this idea that they need to be controlled, again, as you say, because it may lead to a bigger problem. And so I want to understand this diversity of thought that needs to exist, that's being sidelined and continues to be, especially in think tanks that can inform policy. What needs to happen, and how serious of a problem is it?
Thank you. I just came back from Turkey and we knew about the great civilization. Maybe, Professor, there are 2 pointers of the conqueror of Constantinople, his foundation. He says he has 2 pointers how he conquered Istanbul, the Sultan Muhammad. That's right. He said, it takes talent to build a city. The word is talent, knowledge. And it takes a heart to manage the city. So I think we are going back again what we lost today, the knowledge. And I think one of the greatest, what my brother Said talks about, Malaysians and all the Muslim world have lost all the great knowledge of Islam. It's everything. How they built civilization. It's not that the West or either one. I mean, you read civilizational history and you know what they did. And man has been from Adam until today is the same man. Who says Adam has changed? We make ourselves a slave of conditions or not. So we have to go back to the fundamentals of civilization. And for a fact, the word civilization is a taboo today because the word is capitalism and society. They don't have a cosmos, which is to us is the universe, and we don't have a covenant with the creator. So the Muslim lost everything. They think Wall Street is their master. So unless we get out of this grip that they have made it so, and it's our own fault today when we became a servant of their narrative. Thank you. So my point is that change, the internal change is in us, not to tell others what to do.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Julia. I think it's more of a comment than a question, but I'll also try to make it quick. I partially wanted to echo the words of the previous speaker, gentleman right here, who said that we have those Sharia establishments or Sharia embedded in one another way into legislation, and that's what limits people. I think it's if I can put it broader, the very thing of taking Islam as a banner for one job or another eventually makes both religion and faith hostage of this very narrow framework, which limits that deep, complex thinking, its evolution and deepening of the thought publicly for masses. And that's what we've been observing here in Malaysia. I know usually the speakers who come, including you, Prof, probably say that I'm not very familiar with these realities. So, but at the same time, you're here learning about realities on the ground, right? So even in Malaysia, that's been taken for the banner for multiple occasions. Even yesterday's rally on Gaza, on Palestine, right at the same time that Prime Minister here was making a speech right there for the righteous cause, something that angers most of us here. I think it's safe to say that, present company included. But at the very same time, people were expelled from the land and at his very constituency. And how about Islam there? How about those social values that we preach. So when I'm listening to your speech, I'm thinking that maybe it would be good to have people like you giving speeches to not even politicians, policymakers, as educational seminars. And you said it yourself, maybe organizations like IAIS must have those seminars and workshops, but I think it will fall on the deaf ears. Then my next thought is that we need to start from the very basic levels of education, how people grow up, how they are socialized into this. But the problem is that they're socialized over and over again into the very same cycle with the very same lack of either this complexity of thought, because they're exactly told, as you just said, that why you're reading this and not that, because they are socialized in the very same values within the very same narrow framework of politicization of religion, which makes both religion and faith hostage. We have some organic intellectuals here, I've met them, but those people are either disappointed in what's going on and they just prefer to give up, or in any case, they are just not enough to administer this change. So where it leaves us is just expecting for some kind of messiah to come and overhaul the whole system, which has not been happening for many years.
The bad news is the messiah is not coming. The thing is that but you said something about expelling people from the land. What are you talking about?
Yeah, there was a case right yesterday, but the media here also are afraid to make this connection. I've only seen it through the angry comments of the people. Yesterday in Malaysia, in Anwar Ibrahim's constituency, people were expelled from their land.
From the land? By who?
At the time that he was making by the authorities. At the same time that he was making there is a dispute over the land. At the same time that he was making a passionate speech, a very thermonuclear speech about how people are being expelled from the land in Gaza. What I'm saying is that we do not apply the social values here. We do not take care of people here.
Yes.
We are concerned for the people of Gaza.
Thank you.
We are, but
I got it. So I think I'm going to quickly go through the questions in reverse. I think we have to practice what we preach. That's the first thing, and you gain moral power. You gain moral power by being honest and engaging in self-critique. And the way you break the cycle for a bad idea, the way you break the cycle of the bad ideas get reinforced. You have to begin breaking it down and intervene in small pieces, in small places. So there should be so that the whole system over time, so this kind of gradual change. Sometimes you need radical change, but you need the political will, and you need the cooperation of the people on the ground. Otherwise, you're bumping your head. Social change is not easy. Social change causes alienation. You're going to be hurt. You are going to be insulted. You must have a thick skin. And social change is hard. And you also need to have smarts. You must be smart, right? So I think these questions, as your comment was largely a comment about how embedded Islam as a banner item. But I think Islam as a cultural value, raising these questions is the beginning to make those questions possible, right? And and to Mr. Ghazali's comment, takes talent and take heart to manage this. I agree with you. So it requires courage, you see. Most people don't want to rock the boat, because rocking the boat, there's a social cost. You're going to be ostracized. You're going to marginalize. People don't want to marry your son or your daughter. That's where people begin to think about that. You're not going to be invited to the celebrity wedding. You're not going to be invited to occasions because, you're now untouchable. But, if there are many untouchables, they will have to invite some of the untouchables, because even then their parties are not going to be filled, right? If they could exclude. So I think that's important. And Lean's question, unfortunately, I think it is, yes, the question of patriarchy and the power of patriarchy is there, but even men don't know their histories, and men don't know their literary things. So this is a crisis, because for the last 100 years or more, we've been handed out at the public level a very, very simplistic version of Islam. And that has been actually very, very, not very conducive. But it has kept an Islamic identity working. So there's Islamic identity, but there's no depth to this Islamic identity. And the reason is people don't read Rumi. People don't read Hafiz. People don't read Ghalib. People don't read a whole range of local poets. People don't know who's Pramudya Anantatur. His novels are not read. People don't understand these great stories of wisdom that the Malay world has created, has great depth and complexities. Stories of the Malay world are very, very deep and great, but those stories are no longer available, right? Or people don't read them. So yes, I agree with you to some extent that maybe women can do a better job. But you see, this thing also requires investment in the literacy. Investment in literacy, learning languages, learning the classical tradition, and that requires investment. And our universities, unfortunately, are not doing a great job, whether it's in Egypt or in Jakarta. In Cairo to Jakarta, they are not doing a good job, but with equipping in India, that I know, the universities that teach Islamic studies is pitiful, sad, horrible. In India, I'm talking about India. Pakistan also, no, terrible, very superficial, no depth, but big in terms of pronouncements and on the basis of this kind of, statements that are bombastic, but lacking in depth. So I think we need to have sleepless nights over this. Unless you're not going to have sleepless nights, or if some of you don't have a nightmare tonight, then I've been not successful. This must be the number one issue of how you think about this. Thank you. I think we need to go.
Please give a round of applause for Professor Dr. Ebrahim Moosa.
Thank you.
As a gesture of gratitude, I would like to invite Dr. Ahmad Badri to present Prof. Ebrahim Moosa with a token of appreciation. Please, in the front. I'm sorry to cut it short because Professor is having another meeting with the Prime Minister soon. So again, thank you very much for all those who are first time here in IAIS, and hope to see you again, inshallah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.